Another promise that's made is that it's economic development.
There's nothing getting developed. It's a transfer of money. Addictions produce crime. I mean, addictions produce crime. Not every case, but if you have a large group of people that are addicted to drugs, you're going to have more crime. If you have a large group of people that are addicted to gambling, you're going to have more crime. People get into impossible situations when they get addicted to something like that, and some people will opt for crime, some will opt for bankruptcy, some may commit suicide.
What's an amazing thing is across the nation, though, gambling has been promoted strictly on its benefits. There is no mention of the addiction, the bankruptcy.
Well, there's a lot of benefit to the owner, and net, it's a big loser for the citizenry. It's certainly clear that a given percentage of people will become addicted and use money they've got no business using, and that percentage is not a small percentage. In the end, if you have the ability to get people to push a button that gives them back 95 cents on average every time they put in $1, and they can push that button time after time after time, that is a license to print money, and that's the reason that they are licensed. The state says we want part of that, but I really don't think that's a good position for the state of Nebraska to be in.
That's interesting because we're talking about an economic factor, but also a public policy factor.
Yeah,
what kind of government?
That's the one that means the most to me. I mean, I do not think that the state ought to be in the position of selling the needles. I mean, we're going to have drug addicts in this country, but I don't think that the state ought to get in the business where it hopes there's more drug addicts and it starts selling needles. And we're going to have gambling addicts in this country, but I don't think that the state ought to become the sponsor of spreading that addiction.
I think it's good for citizens like the people that have been trying to fight the spread of gambling to hear what you're saying, because so often we feel very outnumbered, that we're up against not only the gambling money, but the political muscle that they often employ. But you're really saying that if you look at this in the dollars and cents and apply some common sense to it, that citizens become losers in this transaction, and our children and our grandchildren could pick up the tab.
Well, there's no way that the citizens of Nebraska won't be losers if you have casinos here. All three of my kids learned at an early age that in those days you pulled the handle. That pulling the handle of a slot machine might have been good exercise, but it was bad economics. Having it inaccessible is a real plus when you're dealing with something that can be addictive. I mean, it should not be easily accessible.
Would you go so far as to, is this a predatory product?
Well, I think it's, yeah, sure. I think if I were governor of the state and I had the power either to have something like this take place or not that that's the case, but I would feel that if I put in something that took the money out of particularly people from lower income situations, caused many of them to become addicted, caused many of them to go broke, caused many of them to have families break up, you just say, we don't need it. But one thing interesting about Las Vegas, if you talk to anybody that operates out there, is they say it's contrary to the laws of economics in a sense, because they say demand rises to meet supply. And that says a lot about gambling. I mean, they say when they got to 30,000 rooms or to 40,000 rooms, people said you're going to saturate. They haven't hit saturation because demand rises to meet supply. And what we're talking about in Nebraska is increasing the supply. And the demand will grow to that, and the demand is from losers. Craps, roulette, all of those things have diminished enormously in relation to the power of slots, because it requires no mental effort whatsoever, and they've arranged it now so you can make these multiple bets and really feed the kitty fast. And the game is simply to get the most dollars through the machine. And machines are ideal for that. They don't eat, they don't get health benefits. They just sit there. And occasionally a guy comes around to fix one if it has a problem. But basically, it's not labor intensive, and it's seductive. They have lots of bells and whistles, and all of the things they've learned will seduce people. And that's why people sit on stools and just sit there and feed away their savings. That is not the game that they're talking about with these two amendments. They are talking about something where hundreds of millions of dollars leave the citizenry and go into the pockets of somebody else. But you're going to have the other 999,000 plus who are going to lose the ability to take their family to a movie, to buy a toy for their kid at Christmas, or worse yet, become an addict and lose everything they have, including their self-respect, and break up their family. I just think that's a terrible trade-off. And I get some kick out of this. Keep the money in Nebraska name attached to people who want to bring casinos here, because there are two propositions out there, and the greatest amount of funds for each one of them promoting them is coming from institutions in Nevada. And if I ever go out to Nevada and start running campaigns and say, let's keep the money in Nevada and put a lot of money in it, believe me, Nevadans should look at me twice, because that's not what I'm all about.
Now, you mentioned if we follow the money and if we do the math, you mean the players are losers?
Yeah, well, I mean, just assume that Nebraska had this and our Nebraska citizens overall lost $100 million. Well, I think in one of the propositions, there's 35% of the first 15 million and 20% of the next money goes to the state. So some of the money will go to the state. That's just like a tax, basically. That comes right out of the citizenry. That doesn't do any development at all. Some of the money will go for operations, and the rest of the money will go for profits. And the sponsors of both of these are out-of-state corporations. So you're not talking about development for Nebraska when you talk about transferring money to Nevada and the state.
And could there be could it have an effect then on taking money out of the local economy that might then not be spent on other items?
Well, if Nebraskans lose, pick a figure, 100 million, casinos come in, the number would undoubtedly be larger than that based on Iowa. But if they lose 100 million, I mean, that's 100 million they don't have to spend on food and toys for their children and movies and everything else. I mean, those are the letters I get. These are people that have been tapped out. It's all gone. In many cases, they've run up balances on their credit cards, and frankly, when I write these people back, I often advise them just to take bankruptcy. I mean, they don't really have an alternative. They're in so deep, and the position of the state of Nebraska should not be to create a whole lot more people that are in that position.